The information and services contained in this program are intended for educational and entertainment purposes only and are not intended as investment advice. Producers of this content are not responsible for the accuracy or validity of any information contained herein. Please consult your financial advisor prior to any investment decisions.
So my name is Jawna. You talked a little bit, MemeBrains talked a little bit about dysfunction in some DAOs, and my involvement in some DAOs is I'm with Bankless DAO. I'm one of the ombuds, so I have been involved and I have seen some of these chats and disputes that go along. So it's very, very interesting, and I completely agree with you. So I'm also a part of Weaver DAO, and I do some work with my DAO. So pleasure to be here. And why don't we just go around with the panel and have everybody introduce themselves?
Well, I'm Steve Echtman, and really honored to be helping organize this today and put these panels together and even get on stage a little bit. So my DAO experience, I started down the rabbit hole with FWB probably almost 2 years ago, and then started DAOPlanet with some other folks, and that's grown into these event productions, and love this conversation about governance, because we're always in the governance conversation in the DAO.
Great, my name is Segall. I started in the DAOs before they were even called DAOs. Even in the early 2000s, I was part of a nonprofit organization where we had 4,000 people that made decisions around how things governed, and we had things around prestige points and reputation points sort of thing. Then in 2015, a company called Decred did a governance model before it was DAO, and that's a very interesting model you should look at. And I'm now part of ATX DAO and helping them figure out how to make all this work.
My name is Carella. I'm the head of product of a DAO tooling company called Charmverse. I'm also the founder of a DAO called Purple, which is a Farcaster ecosystem DAO. I'm a member of Shark DAO, Little Nouns, and FWB.
My name is Eric. I'm a lifelong entrepreneur. I sold my last company to go really deep down the Bitcoin rabbit holes and be a digital nomad, and that led me to becoming a core contributor at CityDAO. I've been there for a while. I run their podcast. We've done about 37 episodes with major leaders in different DAOs, and also with the Wyoming State and city officials here in Miami as well. And yeah, I'm just here because I'm just fascinated with where this whole ecosystem is going.
Yeah, thanks everyone. So I have a question for the audience. How many people here are involved in a DAO? I know it seems obvious. Okay, great. How many people have ever voted in a DAO? Okay. How many people ever put forward a proposal? Okay. How many people wish more people voted? Okay, all right, great. So thank you for responding. So I wanted to ask some questions about voting, and wanted to ask what some of your experience has been in that capacity. And the audience said they would have liked to have seen more people participate. Corey, do you have any thoughts on this or experiences that you can share, or anyone on the panel really like to go around?
Go ahead, if you want.
So the nonprofit organization of 4,000 people I had, when you're looking at who votes, there's two main things, right? You want to make sure they're an active participant, and you want to make sure that someone has the right skills, at least at an operator level, to make the decision. Because if you have people voting that have no idea how to do accounting, why do you want that? So I think the two biggest challenges are making sure you have the right experts making the ultimate decision, and then be empowering the people correctly with people that actually have skin in the game and participation. So the idea of reputation or prestige points are a way to say, hey, those of you who are actively supporting the DAO at that point in time, we're going to go ahead and give you some sort of mechanism to measure that, and then you will have a higher weighted vote versus, say, those who are just, own a governance token that really haven't been playing in the space or participating in the DAO in a year. So even if you had someone maybe that participated for a year in a row and then 3 years down the line did not participate, are they really actively engaged anymore? And so in the organizations that I've been involved with, we had situations where they were active for the first 2-3 years, and then 6 years later, they still had the same voting power, even though they weren't actively involved. So I think the two challenges there are making sure you have active participation has the greatest weight, and that you have the right experts making the right decision.
So this is a really new ecosystem. DAOs are brand new. The concept of decentralized voting is brand new. Using NFTs to vote is brand new. And I don't think that we're done evolving. There's a lot more that's going to happen, right? Because we think we start a DAO of everyone who wants to participate and do some cool stuff. That's the initiative, that's the spirit. And we do have some amazing core contributors that do some incredible stuff. But the reality is that's not the only group of people that's inside of a DAO. And I think that there's 3 types of problems. And I'm going to summarize them as squatters, flippers, and treasury depletion. All right, a squatter is someone that owns an NFT and they don't vote. For whatever reason, they forgot, they don't care, they got busy, they just don't. What happens, it forces the floor price of the DAO to be higher than maybe it should be. And with a lack of participation, we get a lack of results, which is not very good. Flippers intentionally buy the NFTs, not to participate at all. All they care about is flipping. They want to make some money. Right? If we have a DAO for community good, there are people that just buy it so they can resell, and that's not a good thing for the spirit of the DAO. And then while squatters and flippers are doing their thing and not participating, usually the treasuries are depleting without replenishing at the same time. So I think that there's going to be a new wave of DAOs and a new wave of minimum participation requirements probably going to come around in the next bull run. If you don't participate, you might lose your NFT, or you might lose the weight of the NFT. There's a few things that we're obviously exploring as an ecosystem, and there's a long way to go with it. So.
I'll just, having surveyed a wide range of DAOs, maybe some facts, which is like, if you are having 40% voter engagement in your DAO, you're crushing it, and a lot of DAOs have 1% engagement. And so that's maybe not neither by itself good or bad, but it tends to lead towards bad.
Yeah. Yeah, great points. I think the thing I'd like to add to the conversation is like how varied the governance models are amongst DAOs. When I was the initial primary drafter of our governance documents at DAOPlanet to actually take the DAO from a non-tokenized, just democratic Discord emoji voting group into like having some governance and having some like rules beyond that. Like, what did we want to evolve into? I thought I could just take something off the shelf and implement that, change the names, but ended up drafting an entire charter for the organization. And it was really interesting because some people have their ideas of what a DAO is. So we put forward, it requires a 60% vote for something to pass. So you get into quorums and voting, and some people were like, oh, 60%, that's not a DAO. It's only a DAO if it's a 50% voting threshold. And I think the things to look at, a lot of people with nouns, and a lot of DAOs that I've looked at their governance really respect their governance. Things like Juicebox, things like MoonDAO have really interesting things, staking your tokens in order to vote. I think reputation and delegation is really valuable and really important. And some of the automated processes I'm a little skeptical of because I've seen based on like the quorum thresholds and things, somebody could potentially buy enough tokens to then just sweep the treasury. And I think there's things that you got to be careful about. So, what does the governance that you set up in the DAO, what's the potential implication of that?
That's a really good point. So anybody else on the panel, what has your experience been with the different types of voting? For example, like quadratic voting, or does anybody have a model that they like to follow? I guess
Sure.
It would depend on the DAO, of course, but.
Yeah, with City DAO, we do quadratic voting, and there's pros and cons to it. On one side, if someone owns 100 NFTs, and that only gives them a power of 10 when they do a vote. So, on one side, that's good because we don't have whales influencing every decision. On the other side, maybe it's not good because it decreases the amount of calculation that's used for quorum. And I'm saying these as questions and as not as solutions because we are exploring some of the better ways to do this, and we are looking at better ways of governance. Because you can undermine quadratic voting by just spreading. If you have 100 NFTs, put it on 100 wallets. There you go. You just undermine the whole process. The concept of soul-bound tokens is going to be playing a really big role, I think, in the next round of NFTs. That's what we're doing right now, and we're in a bear market too. So, voter participation decreases in any sort of a crypto winter. We're using quadratic right now. We're revisiting a lot of the ops agreement right now, and frankly, anyone that has an idea or wants to contribute, it's a very open discussion happening right now at CityDAO we're very open to input from anyone here or in the room. So that's kind of where my experience would be at the moment.
Yeah, I would just say we need more experiments in voting. I like quadratic. One token, one vote is pretty standard and works until it stops working. I'll just say that I admire FWB, who will change their voting strategy based on the vote, where it's typically one token, one vote, but then there was a vote that was going to affect people who held less tokens, so they switched to quadratic for that.
I'm interested in exploring spendable, whether reputation prestige versus, so those who are actively participating are earning and have more skin in the game, in my opinion, than those who are just sitting on the sidelines, not really participating in the DAO itself. So those who are actively in the DAO, I think, should have a heavier weight than those who don't on the current decisions at the time and the direction of the DAO. Because like I said, over time, people just drop off. So things around that nature. Decred had an interesting one where they, from a logistics perspective, gave every quarter 10% of the, whether you hold one token or a million tokens, doesn't matter, 10% random selection, got tickets, and those ticket holders were able to vote for that quarter on what projects got approved and where the treasury got spent. So there's different models out there, but I think the ability to have, the last thing I want to talk about is if a DAO's been around for 10 years, and I'm a new person, and I work really hard on that DAO, my weight, potentially is not anywhere near as equal as someone who's been around for a while, especially if they own a lot of tokens. So how can I encourage new membership? And that's where I like the spendable, because a spendable, if I'm a new person that worked really hard for 6 months and spent 40 hours a week volunteering for the DAO, I should be able to take that and somehow vote on something I really care about, and that be relatively equal to someone maybe they've been there for 10 years that's voting on a bunch of things. So there's a lot of different checks and balances and weights you got to consider, and they're just some of the ideas I have right now that we're exploring.
Yeah, I like what you're saying, and maybe delegation approaches, some sort of solution toward that. So if you're the person that's showing up now, then people can delegate more of their vote. Because I think there's a lot of lethargy when it comes to voting. Like Jawna, you asked, like how many people vote, and people can't necessarily have the time to spend and like read every proposal that comes through, and so a lot of times in some of these DAOs I'm less active in, I would love to delegate my vote to somebody that I feel it's more of a representational government, and I think that can be a big part of the solution. The high level thing I would say is if you have a DAO and you're thinking about what kind of governance, to really think about what do you want the outcome to be. So not have any dogmatic kind of, it's got to be this way. Look at what options are out there and what is the type of governance that's going to serve the type of organization that you're trying to create.
That's a really good point. Yeah, I completely agree with you. And then just along those lines, in terms of governance token and STO, for example, what has the panel's experience been in terms of separating the two, or some of the pitfalls of just having one?
I'll go. I bridge between the regulatory compliance factor and helping Web3 companies figure out how to meet the correct jurisdictional guidelines. We just had literally, I think 2 weeks ago, the SEC's filing against, Fed Crypto DAO, actually out of Wyoming. And unfortunately, they just didn't file their S1 and a few things that meet regulatory compliance for registering a security. So I think the safest thing to do is separate the ownership token component from the governing decision-making token component. And that way, decision-making on terms of how Treasury is spent, how projects are improved, the direction of, essentially replacing, essentially your board of directors. Maybe you elect operators, because even in a DAO, you got to have people that are smart, that have a skill set to operate. You want to have someone who understands finance to run the finances of the DAO, not some random Joe. And so I think it's really important to separate the governing decision-making and quote voting of the DAO and however that's being done versus the ownership and whether or not you get dividends or royalties versus the product. And maybe I conflict a little bit here with you a little bit here, but the idea of a DAO token going up and down in price is confusing to me, because to me that's more of a product. Or that's the equity component of ownership, and it can be democratized, meaning the organization can own that equity, versus the decision making, which to me is a separate sort of function.
That's great. Chris, you were going to say something, or?
Not really, no.
Okay.
You know, just building off what you're saying with the price of a membership for a DAO. I mean, is it a membership or what is it? Why does the price even move up and down at all? You know, I definitely am an advocate. I like true market pricing. If I'm going to buy a Costco membership or whatever membership, I like the idea that the value of that membership is open market determined. Maybe it's zero. That's a great deal. Maybe it's $1 million. Maybe that's a great deal too in the context of whatever it is that organization is trying to do. I like the idea of open market pricing. The challenge though is that at what point does it cross over to accidentally be an investment? It's a very tricky gray area. You know, the great thing about Bill 38 in Wyoming is that it's very short and simple, and the bad thing about it is that it's very short and simple. It doesn't give a lot of details on, you know, where is that line, and we want to stay on the right side of the line, right? It's supposed to be just like a membership to vote and to govern. That's it. You know, Constitution DAO went into this in a big way as well. Once the DAO shut down, people are reselling the tokens on the open market for huge gains, right? And I don't mind saying, I mean, I accidentally gained a lot on Constitution DAO. I didn't get into it for that, but that's what happened, right? And does that mean that now it's an investment? And they were luckily able to navigate that properly. But anyways, these are big industry questions and problems that, you know, we all get to think about, and we all get to participate on, and we actually get to influence how some of these rules get made. And this is the greatest thing about being in a new market. We can influence how the rules are going to be written by talking about it like this. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So just along those lines, in terms of a governance token for decision making only, for DAOs that maybe previously set up and they didn't call out that specific detail, now we're concerned about being classified as, I call it the S word, right? The security. Does the panel have any thoughts or guidance for maybe anybody else that's out there in the audience?
I think we have to be careful of the word guidance.
Yeah,
So
I
this
should
is not
say,
legal advice.
This is not legal advice, but maybe thoughts or things that we've seen.
Yeah, the guidelines that I use, that I think of, is that if we're going to be minting tokens and we're going to be selling these tokens and they're going to, at some point in time, free float on exchanges, we have to think that eventually they're going to be called securities.
Right.
I think the beauty of DAOs and the time that we're in right now is we can relatively not risk-free, but with little risk, start organizations with communities that can turn into really functional, operational organizations, and just have an eye on this will someday be a security. It may not now, but it may in 2 years or 3 years, and be prepared for that. What's the cleanup look like? So if we, you know, maybe do KYC from the get-go. Everybody in crypto is sort of, a lot of people race to it for the anonymity, but in my mind, that anonymity is going to go away. So yeah, maybe we should look at doing KYC from the beginning.
That's a really good point. MemeBrains, you were going to say something?
Well, I mean, one of the broader topics at play with this entire ecosystem, you know, just from my own personal perspective, not related to City DAO, is that are we as a society going to evolve governance and rules of the game to work with the decentralization and this movement of Bitcoin and blockchain? Or is it going to be a completely like revolution and a whole new system is going to come up and, you know, fiat is going to disappear and everyone's going to be on Bitcoin and existing systems are going to burn down? You know, and I don't know the answer. No one really knows the answer. I think that, you know, at City DAO, we're looking to work with government. And when you're working in something that doesn't have clearly written rules, all we can do is an absolute best effort. You know, we certainly put a best effort. We spend a lot of money on legal. We do a lot of things to try and cover our butts in every way imaginable. It's not easy, and it's a continuous battle. But there's going to be other groups that don't care at all, and they're going to just forge ahead and maybe create like a new type of a system that puts the middle finger up on current governance. And I don't know exactly where we're going as a species in that direction. But part of my presentation was it's certainly going to be different than it is today.
Yeah, I'm certain there's a lot of unintended consequences that are to come that we don't yet know, certainly sort of like the voting, right? We didn't anticipate everything that would happen with the voting, and now we're learning. So when we jumped into this and I asked the audience some questions, we kind of dove right into voting and whatnot. I guess my question here is I'd take a few steps back. If a DAO was just starting out, is there a framework? I know that no one size fits all, but is there a framework or perhaps some resources that a new DAO could use to help put together a good governance structure?
If you're doing a Nounish DAO like I have, there are lots of resources. Nouns did it first, Little Nouns did it next. They've published everything. It's all CCO and on the internet. That's one. Two, I also then would point people towards Juicebox's docs. Juicebox has a really good governance process that I think is kind of best in class. What do other people think?
Yeah, I use Decred and their governance doc just as a starting point. Again, they're a little older project, but they kind of got some of it right just off the bat. As far as the regulatory piece of it, or trying to make yourself at least SEC, let's just say bulletproof-ish, is really thinking about how to use the current crowdfunding vehicles to allow that investment, that ownership in the DAO. Whether through a Reg CF or a Reg A+, we call it. And that way you get covered on the security side and allow people to get dividends and rights and royalties and all that, and not worry about whether or not this is a product and a royalty or is it security and a dividend and a payment. And so by doing that up front, or thinking about that up front, I think you cover yourself, and then make the governing token, the decision token, being a separate aspect of it, to how the company's going to be run and how the decisions are going to be made and who's elected to operate. Personally, I think that's a general framework that I would start off with. And if any of y'all get in trouble with the remediation or needs, I'll be happy to give you unofficial, uninformed guidance opinions.
Yeah, I would just add that what I tend to do is look toward existing models. Look at what's happened in the past. How are those organizations being treated? If you think of it like, okay, we're a duck. What kind of duck is it? Are we walking like a duck, quacking like a duck? Securities regulators are going to be like, you're a duck. We don't care what you call it.
Right.
So what kind of duck do we? What kind of animal are we? And what models are out there? We're in an amazing place where DAOs are enabling the evolution of organizations, global, distributed, decentralized, whatever you call the D, organizations that can be quite powerful. Cooperatives in Europe are some of the biggest corporations or organizations out there. And I think there's a lot to borrow from. And we'll hear some talks later about the evolution of organizations. And I think this is just one more step along the path of like, what are we moving from? And then what are we moving to? And we don't need to necessarily throw the baby out with the bathwater. What can we learn from how organizations have grown over the last 200 years?
Yeah, no, absolutely, absolutely. So I don't know if we, how much time we have here, or if we're
5 minutes. We
5
could
more
do
minutes?
a Q&A.
Yeah, I was going to say maybe have some questions for the audience. We wanted to keep it as interactive as possible, so. Do you want me to run with the mic?
Yeah, well, maybe we can get a mic runner to come on up and grab this mic I've got.
I'll do it.
Awesome, thank you.
For audience questions?
Yeah.
Okay, do we have one?
Do we have any questions? Please ask away. You have
I gotta
some
really
great
run
resources
to this
here.
one. Here you go.
What type of solutions are you seeing in the banking world to bank DAOs now?
At the larger level, they're not really, happening. I've heard and seen some banking DAOs. Again, it's more of the governance component of it. They still have to get, to be a real bank, they have to have a banking charter, or at minimum, to do lending. I mean, you saw Celsius and BlockFi get in trouble for not having to be a bank in terms of lending. Although that being said, there are banks, specifically in Wyoming, that they do everything but lending. And so the question is, what do you mean by bank? I think it's called SBIDC, something like that. SBIDC, Special Purpose Investment Deposit Vehicle, something like that. So the answer is, really, in my mind, the DAO component is not being run by a board of directors, not necessarily run by executives, but run by the organization, the membership. And I personally agree, electing those who know those specific areas as operators is kind of a good model. So I don't know a lot about the current banking DAOs and kind of how they're operating, to be honest. Space is too big.
Thanks. In navigating the volatile space of token value, how do we compensate people who are contributing through governance without having them technically as employees? And what is the best strategy to keep us safe while compensating appropriately for contributions?
Well, it's interesting. I was having a conversation about this last night at like 2 or 3 in the morning, as sometimes these conversations around DAOs go. And I think you just have to also be careful, especially around compensation. If your token has a value, but you're giving them out to people for their efforts, that's a taxable event in most countries. That's giving them value. They need to pay tax on that. So I look to the, again, looking back at the model, stock option model, if you have preferred shares and common shares, you can usually price the common shares at about, if there's preferred shares that will get a preference on distributions, if there's a change of control, then have a value and know that, and have everybody understand that if you get value just given to you, that could be a taxable event on that level at least.
If you use NFTs as the payment, does that navigate more
If the NFTs
safely?
have value, if they have value at the time that they're being transferred, that's just like giving somebody cash. They need to get a 1099 based on the value of whatever it was. And I'm not an accountant, so this is not legal or accounting advice, but the law, as I understand it, says that that's a taxable event. If you distribute tokens before they're worth anything, then it's not a taxable event, because you can say nothing exists, we just have tokens, and but you're then not paying like bounties. Let's say you have bounties, and it's like, okay, if you do X, I give you Y number of tokens, and those tokens are already out on the market with a free floating value, then that you have to talk to your accountant about that.
So I use Decred because they've always paid their volunteers, their developers, in their own Decred currency for 7 years now. So everyone for 7 years that's developed that blockchain and participated in the governance in those projects have all been paid in Decred, and then they took the Decred and cashed out for fiat to pay for real-world operational, living expenses. So I think in general, that's one way you can go about it. The other way is you have a treasury and you pay people like you would pay anyone that would work for you with fiat or with stable coin. Probably a stable coin, maybe not, because some people want to earn money to pay for food in their house, and they don't necessarily want to participate in the up and down of the market. If one day, the coin they own drops by 50%, that may cause them not to be able to pay for their mortgage, right? So the question is really what the point of paying your workers or rewarding people that are volunteering. And I think at least through a stable coin probably makes more sense to me, at least. Maybe, or a mixture of both if they're willing to take the risk on this. But really that, this case Decred went up and down. And so it's really kind of hard when you're trying to just put food on the table and take care of your kids. So it depends on what you want to do.
I'll just add really quick, and it was on an earlier panel in the legal panels, that if you're trying to use tokens to avoid something like taxation or something, it's a real world thing, and it's obvious that you're using that to kind of skirt some taxation or tax law or laws, that's when there's going to be a gotcha. So just make sure you're adhering to laws if you don't want to end up with a huge liability down the road.
I'm curious, kind of y'all's opinions on how DAOs should store treasuries and how DAOs should do compensation for members, because a lot of DAOs will do governance tokens, but obviously governance tokens don't put food on the table some of the time. And then there's a question of how much you really want to put into fiat versus like a USDC or maybe something that's stable but maybe not pegged to anything. Just curious your thoughts.
Maybe Adam wants to take some of this. We're dealing with a little bit of that at DAOPlanet. Like, what do we hold our treasury in? It's so volatile unless you put into USDC or something.
I'm in ETH Maxi, so I hold everything in ETH. But I do think that for many DAOs, it makes sense to hold whatever you're comfortable with, 60% of your treasury in USDC.
I mean, I personally think it should be I'm a non-custodial guy, so whether it's like an Unchained Capital or a Fireblocks where you have 3 or 4 signatures that are needed to move the larger amounts. And then again, when you elect a treasurer or CFO, their responsibility is to do the payouts, and I think the payouts should be done in some structured format. So like that nonprofit organization I said before, there was even DAOs, we rewarded prestige or reputation or payments based on a set of guidelines that everyone knew about. Like, okay, if you spent 40 hours a month running this regional organization, you got paid X amount. It was just set. And as long as someone above you said, yes, you performed relatively accurately, then that would be the CFO in this case or whomever that had the access treasury would pay you that. So this is to give you the example. I don't think you should overcomplicate it. Maybe you could do smart contracts around that, but I think there needs to be a quality of work validation. Just because you hold an office doesn't mean you're actually performing the work. So there needs to be some sort of intermediary approval at some level, I think, to audit. The payment could be automated. But the person to press the button, I think, needs to say, hey, yeah, this person did spend roughly 40 hours of good quality time on our DAO.
I think we're just a little bit over time, but if anybody has something burning they want to share, and Jawna, you've been asking a lot of questions. Can I ask for you to answer some question or give some perspective?
To any question or for just me to? So I'll just say a little bit about myself. So I'm new to this space, and Steve was kind enough to invite me up to moderate the panel. So what my comment really would be from a governance standpoint is, like what MemeBrains said, is get involved to the capacity that you can be involved in, and that really would be my advice for anybody in this space, and for anybody that's sitting in this audience here that's not yet involved in something. I would say don't let anything stop you. Just jump right in and ask a lot of questions, and don't be shy or afraid to say, I don't know, because there's a lot of questions and answers that I don't know. So that's what I want to share. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for presentations and being panel members. This has been a great day, and we have more to come.
Thank you, guys.